The movement for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people has always been long and fraught. Despite the liberal environment we live in Overlake and the general surrounding area, the truth is the majority of the country has only been safe for LGBT people in the past 30, 40 years or so, and maybe even less than that, and some of the most major gains have only been made in the past 10 to 20. We're pretty young, but the scars of mass oppression still have an effect on LGBT people today and LGBT people adults, and it stays in legislation and in people's opinions that are passed down, etc. For a long time in the Western world, gay men were seen as devious and devilish, and at first the view of women was it was essentially thought that lesbian women were basically only just friends, because how could any woman possibly have sexual feelings? And then sort of after, World War I or II, people began to realize that women could actually, do things, and so then women were also categorized in that sort of area, especially butch women. So essentially what the LGBT movement wants is protection from discrimination in the workplace, in government-run facilities, in schools, and protections for LGBT people such as children in homophobic homes, and for LGBT people who are who face violence in their everyday lives, so protection from hate crimes, and also acceptance, just like a cultural change that the cultural realization that there isn't anything deviant about being gay or transgender, that it's just a thing that some people are. Starting in 1924 in America, gay rights groups began to form, and some of them disbanded, but lots of them were staging protests in bars, or were getting newspapers published, or magazines published that catered to LGBT people, and winning the right to send those out through the U.S. Postal Service from the Supreme Court. And all these tensions were mounting from 1924 up to 1969 when the Stonewall riots happened. Police had a tendency to enjoy raiding gay bars and the like, and they attempted to raid the Stonewall Inn at 1 a.m. The patrons were all a bunch of pretty young LGBT people, and this raid really started a huge riot at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich. Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman, is credited with throwing the first stone. She is a huge activist, or was a huge activist. She also helped found organizations that would help transgender people and transgender women and gay people. But she also helped start this huge riot. It lasted for 3 days. There were thousands of people involved. There was lots of violence. Both it was a lot of angry, frustrated LGBT youth in particular versus a bunch of violent cops. And it received minimal news coverage. But despite that, it's really credited with sparking the LGBT movement to gain a lot of the traction that it did. On June 28th. In 1970, which is the exact one-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, a peaceful LGBT march was held through Central Park, and that was the first gay pride, and you can sort of see this duality between a lot of frustrated violence that's brought because police are violent and the government is violent against LGBT people, and also peaceful protest because, LGBT people aren't a bunch of violent monsters. They just want to be accepted and not put in danger by other people. Marches such as these continue. In 1979, there's the March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. There were an estimated 75,000 participants, LGBT and allies alike, demanding equal civil rights and protective legislation for LGBT people. And these protests are obviously working because in 1980, the Democratic Rules Committee explicitly states that they will not discriminate against LGBT people, which makes the Democratic Party the first major political party to support LGBT rights. Furthermore, in 1982, Wisconsin becomes the first state to outlaw discrimination against gay people, and everything seems to be going swell, but there is an issue. A disease pops up in 1981. At first, it's thought to be a cancer. Some people called it the plague against gay people because for a long time it was only documented homosexuality. You may have already guessed that this is AIDS. And a lot of people are dying, and Ronald Reagan is in office at the time, and he doesn't speak publicly about it until the very end of his campaign. Meanwhile, there are thousands of people dying. You can read accounts of people who are literally young, attractive, healthy people who are literally wasting away, and they look like they're crumbly, and they look horrible, and nothing is being done about it. And one thing that the government does do, actually, is run these posters in magazines, but essentially they were all really demeaning posters. They had posters with graves on them, and they said things like, learn about AIDS, people are dying to know. and other sort of things that trivialize or make fun of the deaths of horrible, painful deaths of thousands of people. And it actually is illegal at the time for the government, for any government-funded anti-AIDS campaign to implicitly or explicitly support homosexuality in any way whatsoever. Eventually, however, the Ryan White Care Act is passed, hopefully thanks to the 1987 March on Washington demanding Reagan to address the AIDS crisis, which he does eventually do. There are odd things that occur at the same time, such as in 1966, Romer versus Evans happened, where the Supreme Court declared Colorado's Second Amendment, which denied LGBT people protection from discrimination, unconstitutional. Meanwhile, in the same year, Reagan passed the Defense of Marriage Act, which declared marriage essentially to be one man plus one woman. So it essentially meant that any state that didn't allow same-sex marriage was not required to recognize a same-sex marriage from out of state, which really restricted any LGBT people who wanted to, stay legally with their partners to live in certain areas, at this time, very small areas around the country. And then, of course, there was Don't Ask, Don't Tell, where the Department of Defense, which originally prohibited the U.S. military from accepting any gay applicants, to allowing them to accept applicants so long as they never said explicitly they were gay, and essentially if you were part of the U.S. military, you were forbidden from engaging in homosexual activity or revealing your orientation, otherwise you were out. As time goes on, and I think that this is in huge thanks, in part hugely to the internet, which allowed a lot of gay people who felt very isolated to seek assistance online. As we got into the 2000s, people were able to find communities and find ways to receive acceptance from other people and become more confident in their own lives and their own protests more publicly. Change began to happen. For example, in 2003, there was Lawrence versus Texas, where the Supreme Court ruled anti-sodomy laws unconstitutional, which was a huge gain for LGBT people because it essentially, was made to persecute gay men. And then in 2004, Massachusetts becomes the first state to legalize gay marriage, and then in 2009, there's the Matthew Shepard Act, which essentially the 1969 U.S. federal hate crime law was expanded to include not only disability but also actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Matthew Shepard was tortured and murdered in Laramie, Wyoming in 1998. You can look that up. There's a lot of information in documentaries, and there's actually a play about it too. It's all very horrible, but also really interesting, I guess. And then finally in 2010, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed, and gays and lesbians are allowed to serve openly in the military. And then in 2015, only 11 years after the first state legalized gay marriage, the Supreme Court declares marriage inequality unconstitutional. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Right now there's a lot of stuff about transgender people in bathrooms because North Carolina made it so that people had to use the bathroom of the gender on their birth certificate, but then the Supreme Court ruled that illegal, and North Carolina's like, we're doing that anyways, so, there are lots of struggles continuing to go on today. As for the long-term impacts of the movement, while homophobia is far from over, we have made incredible strides. To be LGBT only 50, 60 years ago was to live hiding yourself in the world, and if you, lest you lose any social status, job, or professional recognition, financial security, you could lose your family, all your friends, people finding out you were gay could ruin you. The phrase "in the closet" was truly horribly apt. And while to some extent similar things can be said for LGBT people today, especially depending on the environment they're in and what their family is like. I can walk around campus with my girlfriend. I'm taking her to prom tomorrow. It's all very exciting, and I'm very lucky, and we're very lucky. And overall, the legal stature of LGBT rights and the social perception of the humanity of LGBT people is just at a much better place than it was. Thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks. Actually, thank you so much.